The story begins with a panoramic view of Solomon's throne room. The room is filled with the golden glow of the morning sun streaming through intricately carved windows. Courtiers, advisors, and emissaries from distant lands line the hall, their faces a mix of awe and reverence. At the center sits Solomon, the king of Israel, on his magnificent throne of ivory overlaid with pure gold. His expression is one of calm authority, his eyes sharp yet kind as he listens to the concerns of his people. His voice, firm but gentle, delivers judgment in a way that astounds everyone present. Solomon's reputation as the wisest man on earth is evident. News of his wisdom and wealth has spread far beyond Israel's borders, drawing traders, scholars, and monarchs from distant lands to witness his unmatched brilliance. This scene sets the stage for the king's unparalleled rise, highlighting the divine favor that brought him here. However, there is an undercurrent of tension, a subtle foreshadowing of the challenges and compromises that will later shape his reign. The narrative shifts to a pivotal moment in Solomon's life, the dream at Gibeon. It is a serene night, and the young Solomon, newly crowned, kneels in prayer. His heart is heavy with the enormity of his task to govern Israel. In the dream, God appears to him in a radiant light, offering Solomon anything he desires. The young king's response reveals his deep humility and sense of responsibility. "Give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people," Solomon says, "that I may discern between good and evil." God is pleased with Solomon's unselfish request and promises not only unparalleled wisdom, but also wealth, honor, and long life if he remains faithful to his commandments. The dream fades, leaving Solomon awestruck and inspired. This moment marks the beginning of a divine covenant and the foundation of Solomon's legacy. Enjoying the story? Like, subscribe, and share to support us. Let's continue. Solomon's newfound wisdom is soon put to the test in one of his most famous judgments. Two women come before him, each claiming to be the mother of a baby. The tension in the court is palpable as the women plead their cases. Solomon, after listening intently, delivers an unexpected decree: cut the living child in two and give half to each woman. Gasps echo through the court. The true mother, driven by love, begs the king to spare the child's life and give him to the other woman. Solomon's face softens as he declares, "Give the child to the first woman. She is the mother." The court erupts in admiration, marveling at the king's divine wisdom. This moment cements Solomon's reputation, showing not only his discernment, but also his understanding of human nature. As Solomon's reign progresses, Israel experiences unprecedented prosperity. The narrative paints a vivid picture of bustling markets, traders from distant lands displaying exotic goods, and fleets of ships returning laden with treasures. The streets of Jerusalem are alive with activity, artisans crafting fine wares, merchants haggling over prices, and children laughing as they play. Solomon's wisdom guides the kingdom's economy, turning Israel into a hub of trade and culture. The riches of the nation are evident everywhere, from the lavish decorations of the palace to the finely woven garments of its people. This period of abundance and peace reflects God's blessings on Solomon and his reign. However, amid the grandeur, a subtle shift begins to emerge, a sense of pride and indulgence creeping into the king's heart. The focus turns to the construction of the temple in Jerusalem, a monumental task that fulfills the dream of Solomon's father, David. The narrative describes the meticulous planning and effort involved. Cedar wood from Lebanon is transported, gold and bronze are shaped into intricate designs, and thousands of laborers work tirelessly under Solomon's direction. The temple is described as an architectural marvel, its interior shimmering with gold, its walls adorned with carvings of cherubim, palm trees, and flowers. When the temple is finally completed, it stands as a testament to God's presence among his people and Solomon's devotion to the Lord. The dedication ceremony is a grand spectacle. Solomon offers prayers of thanksgiving and supplication, and a divine cloud descends upon the temple, signifying God's acceptance. The people of Israel bow in reverence, their hearts filled with awe and gratitude. This moment is the pinnacle of Solomon's spiritual journey, a time when his relationship with God is at its strongest. Years pass, and Solomon's fame spreads far and wide. The Queen of Sheba, a monarch known for her wisdom and wealth, arrives in Jerusalem to test Solomon with riddles and questions. The narrative vividly describes her entrance. A caravan of camels laden with spices, gold, and precious stones winds through the gates of the city. She is awestruck by the opulence of Solomon's court, the magnificence of his palace, and the wisdom with which he answers her every query. "The report I heard in my own country did not do you justice," she declares. "Your wisdom and wealth far exceed what was told to me." Her visit is a moment of triumph for Solomon, showcasing not only his God-given wisdom, but also the height of Israel's glory under his reign. Yet, even in this moment of success, the seeds of his eventual downfall are quietly sown as Solomon begins to focus more on earthly accomplishments than on his relationship with God. Solomon's alliances with neighboring nations, sealed through marriages, begin to take a toll on his spiritual integrity. The narrative delves into the reasons behind these unions: political stability, economic advantage, but also highlights their spiritual cost. Despite God's clear command not to marry foreign women, Solomon's heart is swayed by the allure of these alliances. The text describes the grand celebrations of these weddings, the exotic customs brought into the palace, and the growing influence of foreign cultures within Israel. These marriages, while strengthening Israel politically, begin to erode its spiritual foundation. Solomon's foreign wives bring their gods with them, and the king, out of love or a desire to please them, allows altars to be built for their worship. This marks the beginning of his drift away from God. As Solomon grows older, the altars to foreign gods multiply. The narrative paints a picture of high places built on hilltops, smoke from sacrifices rising into the sky. Despite the warnings from prophets and his own conscience, Solomon allows these practices to continue, driven by his affection for his foreign wives. The scene contrasts the grandeur of the temple with the simplicity of these pagan shrines, highlighting the spiritual decay setting in. Solomon's heart, once fully devoted to God, is now divided. His prayers become less frequent, his faith dimmed by the distractions of wealth, power, and indulgence. This period marks the slow unraveling of his spiritual integrity. A prophet confronts Solomon with a message from God. The prophet's voice rings out in the palace courtyard, accusing the king of forsaking the Lord's commandments. The words are sharp and piercing. "Because you have turned away from the Lord, the kingdom will be torn from you." Solomon listens in silence, his face betraying a mix of guilt and anger. The narrative captures the moment's gravity, showing how the divine warnings Solomon once heeded are now met with resistance. His pride, which has grown alongside his wealth and power, prevents him from fully repenting. The seeds of Israel's division are sown in this encounter. The kingdom begins to fracture under the weight of Solomon's excesses. Heavy taxes and forced labor, necessary to sustain his lavish lifestyle and endless construction projects, breed resentment among the people. The narrative describes the growing unrest in the streets of Jerusalem, with merchants and laborers whispering discontent. "How much more must we bear?" they ask. Solomon, isolated in his palace, remains unaware of the depth of the dissatisfaction spreading through his kingdom. The prosperity that once unified Israel now becomes a source of division, foreshadowing the conflicts to come. Solomon's pursuit of worldly pleasures reaches its peak. The narrative vividly describes grand banquets, exotic entertainments, and the accumulation of treasures from across the known world. His fleet of ships brings gold, silver, ivory, and even peacocks from far-off lands. Yet, amid all this opulence, Solomon feels an increasing emptiness. The camera lingers on his face during a banquet, showing a man surrounded by every earthly delight but haunted by a sense of loss and regret. His thoughts drift to the God who once guided him so closely. In his solitude, Solomon begins to write the book of Ecclesiastes. The narrative shifts to a somber tone as the king reflects on the vanity of his pursuits. "Meaningless, meaningless," he writes. "Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless." The scene describes his study, filled with the remnants of his past achievements, scrolls of proverbs, plans for the temple, gifts from foreign dignitaries. Solomon's pen moves across the parchment, his words a stark contrast to the glory of his youth. Through his writing, he grapples with the realization that all his wealth, wisdom, and power are hollow without God. The narrative revisits Solomon's earlier days, contrasting his youthful devotion to God with his current state. Flashbacks show a young Solomon praying fervently, dedicating the temple, and offering sacrifices with genuine faith. These moments are interwoven with scenes of his present life, where he struggles to reconnect with the God he has drifted away from. The juxtaposition is poignant, showing how far he has fallen and how deeply he longs to return to the simplicity of his early faith. God's judgment becomes inevitable. The prophet Ahijah meets Jeroboam, a prominent official, outside Jerusalem and delivers a dramatic prophecy. Ahijah tears his cloak into 12 pieces, giving 10 to Jeroboam, symbolizing the division of Israel. The Lord will take the kingdom away from Solomon's lineage, the prophet declares, but for the sake of David, not during his lifetime. The narrative emphasizes the mercy and justice of God. Even in judgment, the weight of Solomon's choices becomes clear as the story foreshadows the division that will fracture the nation. In his final days, Solomon sits in his palace, reflecting on his life. The narrative describes his surroundings, the golden walls, the lavish decorations, the remnants of a once glorious reign. But Solomon's focus is inward. He pens his final thoughts, urging future generations to fear God and keep his commandments. "This is the duty of all mankind," he writes. His words carry the weight of a lifetime of triumphs and failures, offering a final lesson to those who would follow. Solomon's story ends not with the fanfare of a great king, but with the quiet resolve of a man who has learned, too late, the true meaning of life. The story concludes with a reflection on Solomon's legacy. His life serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of pride, temptation, and drifting away from God. The narrative ends with a call to the audience to learn from Solomon's mistakes and to prioritize a relationship with God above all else. The imagery shifts to a hopeful tone, showing the rising sun over Jerusalem, symbolizing the enduring mercy and love of God for his people despite their failings. The narrative revisits Solomon's vast wealth. His annual income in gold alone is described, along with his unparalleled trade routes connecting distant lands. Solomon's throne, a masterpiece of craftsmanship adorned with ivory and gold, symbolizes his immense power. However, the imagery also portrays the burden of maintaining such opulence. The demands of the royal treasury grow heavier, and the cost of luxury begins to alienate the common people. Even Solomon, surrounded by riches, feels the weight of his pursuits as material wealth fails to bring him peace. A poignant flashback depicts Solomon as a young boy, sitting at his father David's feet. David shares his dreams of building a temple for God, his voice filled with passion and reverence. "You will do this," David says, "because the Lord has chosen you for this great task." This memory contrasts sharply with Solomon's later years. As he reflects on how far he has strayed from his father's vision, the scene highlights the weight of legacy and the pain of failing to uphold it. The camera lingers on the temple Solomon built, once a symbol of divine presence, now overshadowed by neglect and the looming high places of foreign gods. The narrative describes the faded glory of the temple, the cracks in its walls, and the diminished reverence of the people. The scene reflects how Solomon's spiritual decline has mirrored the physical decay of his greatest achievement, a painful reminder of the consequences of turning away from God. God's second appearance to Solomon is revisited in a flashback. The scene portrays the awe and reverence of that divine encounter, emphasizing the stark contrast with Solomon's present state. God's words are clear. "If you or your descendants turn away from me, I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them." The narrative underscores the tragedy of Solomon's choices, showing how he ignored these warnings and allowed his heart to grow cold. Solomon's writings in Ecclesiastes take center stage. The narrative delves into his profound observations on life's fleeting nature. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. The story reflects on the wisdom embedded in these words, juxtaposed with the sadness of their author's regrets. Solomon's search for meaning, even as he approaches the end of his life, is deeply human and relatable. The kingdom's impending division becomes clearer. The narrative describes growing tensions among Israel's tribes, with the northern tribes feeling neglected and overburdened by Solomon's policies. Advisors warn Solomon of the unrest, but his pride blinds him to the danger. The scene portrays a kingdom at the brink, a once unified people now divided by mistrust and resentment. Solomon's later years are filled with loneliness. The narrative describes how his relationships with his foreign wives, once sources of joy, become burdens. The spiritual disconnect between them and the king deepens. His court, once lively with scholars and artists, feels hollow. The grandeur of his palace only amplifies his solitude, as Solomon realizes that his true contentment lay in the God he has forsaken. A pivotal scene depicts Solomon witnessing a sacrifice to a foreign god at one of the high places he allowed to be built. The narrative captures his inner turmoil as he watches people bow before idols. For a moment, he considers tearing down the altar, but his resolve falters. This moment symbolizes his ultimate failure to lead Israel back to God, a king defeated by his own compromises. The focus shifts to the prophet Ahijah delivering his prophecy to Jeroboam. The narrative describes the cloak being torn into 12 pieces, the dramatic gesture symbolizing the tearing apart of the kingdom. Jeroboam's expression shifts from shock to resolve as he accepts the 10 pieces. This moment marks the beginning of a new chapter for Israel, though it is one born of division and loss. Solomon reflects on his father David's legacy. He remembers David's deep repentance after his own sins and contrasts it with his inability to fully return to God. The narrative emphasizes the difference between the two kings. David's heart, despite its flaws, always sought after God, while Solomon's heart grew divided. This reflection is bittersweet, as Solomon realizes what he has lost and what he can never regain. The narrative reaches its climax as Solomon pens the final verses of Ecclesiastes. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. The scene is filled with a sense of urgency as the king, now frail and near death, writes with trembling hands. His words are both a confession and a plea to future generations, a legacy born from both wisdom and failure. Solomon's death is described in a solemn tone. The palace is quiet as news spreads throughout the kingdom. His passing marks the end of an era. But the narrative leaves the reader with a sense of unfinished business, an Israel poised for division and strife. The grandeur of Solomon's reign fades, leaving behind lessons for future generations. Rehoboam, Solomon's son, ascends to the throne. The narrative briefly describes the arrogance and folly that characterize his early reign, leading to the rebellion of the northern tribes. The division of Israel becomes a harsh reality, fulfilling the prophecy delivered to Solomon. The scene reflects on the fragility of human ambition without a foundation in God. The story closes with a reflection on Solomon's legacy. The narrative highlights the duality of his life, a king who achieved unparalleled greatness yet succumbed to the same weaknesses that plague all humanity. His life is a cautionary tale, but also a reminder of God's enduring grace. The scene ends with a hopeful image, reminding viewers that even in failure, there is a path back to God through repentance and faith.